Hey everyone, welcome back to Spiral Emanations, the show where we try to uncover the mysteries hiding behind the headlines you see every week. It's been a week full of big energies in the news, and honestly, right here at home too. I'm Skye Gracely, coming to you from Los Angeles. We just had the Dodgers championship parade, and for a minute, it almost felt like LA turned into one big family, all out on the streets together. I don't think I've seen the city this united or festive in, well, years. It was actually kind of moving.
That sounds absolutely wonderful, Skye. Meanwhile, I'm Reece Barrows, checking in from London, and it's not quite the same mood over here. To be honest, it's been sheer mayhem, between the train strikes, overflowing crowds, and everyone desperately trying to get wherever they're going before Christmas hits. I know London's never exactly calm this time of year, but right now, it's like someone turned the chaos up to 11.
Honestly, city life's been intense, but what's happening in the world's oceans right now is on another level entirely. So here's the lineup for today's episode. Scientists are saying parts of the oceans are turning dramatically darker. There's a deep-sea volcano off Oregon that looks like it's about to erupt any day. A team in New Zealand actually filmed a sharktopus. That's an octopus riding a mako shark, which, yes, is apparently a thing now. And we've got these new, haunting recordings of monk seal voices echoing from way down in the deep. Reece, do you ever get the sense these things aren't just random?
Yeah, and when you start seeing all these phenomena cropping up at once, you can't help but notice a pattern. Or maybe pattern's not even the right word, more like an old story repeating itself. You've got ancient chaos rising, boundaries that used to hold steady starting to blur, and the ocean's light, not just scientifically, but mythically, sort of ebbing away. It really feels like something deeper is shifting.
Exactly. And that's kind of why we wanted to talk to someone who quite literally lives at that boundary. So tonight we're bringing in Brother Gideon Stern. He's a lighthouse chaplain on one of the most remote islands up in Scotland, and he spent his entire life keeping watch on that line between land and sea. If anyone understands what it means when omens start stacking up in the deep, I don't think there's a better person to ask. And with so many wild stories about the sea popping up lately, almost every time I check my phone, I have to admit, I feel like I'm missing some big pieces. Brother Gideon, we'd love to hear your take in just a moment. But first, Reece, can you break down what's happening out there?
Sure. So, the big one to start with is this study from the University of Plymouth. Published in Global Change Biology, they worked with NASA's Ocean Color Web program. Since 2003, they've tracked that about 21% of the world's oceans are letting in less sunlight than before. They call it the photic zone, the sunlit layer, usually down to about 200 meters, where almost all marine life gets its start. Well now, that band is getting much shallower in a lot of places.
So that means when they talk about the ocean getting darker, it's just less sunlight, not some kind of big pollution event or oil spill.
Exactly. It's all about sunlight not reaching as deep. The satellite data shows that in about 9% of those areas, the light zone is at least 50 meters shallower, and in 3%, it's over 100 meters shallower now. That's huge, because most ocean life depends on that layer. But why is this happening? Researchers think it's a mix: warmer oceans, shifting currents, maybe changes in plankton or really fine particles suspended out there. But especially far from shore, no one's nailed down a single explanation. There's just not enough data yet.
And this isn't just something you see near beaches, right? It's out in the real open water?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, in about 10% of coastal zones, think 37 million square kilometers, the water has actually gotten lighter. But it's the darkening offshore in the big, deep stretches that really matters for the world's fisheries and marine food webs.
So when we talk about these darkening patches offshore, is that just a big deal for fish and whales and everything out there? Or does it actually affect us too?
It's a lot bigger than just fish. The real magic is in plankton, the tiny drifting life in that sunlit layer. Most folks don't realize, but more than half the oxygen we breathe actually comes from plankton in the ocean, not the forests or rainforests. If that light-filled zone keeps shrinking, it's not just the food chain that changes, it's the air in our lungs. The ocean's kind of like the planet's hidden lungs, and all this darkening really hits home when you think about it that way.
I always thought the Amazon was the real powerhouse for that.
Yeah, and that's just one more way the ocean has been quietly shaping our whole world, even before we notice. There's so much changing out there, some of it happening right under our noses.
It's wild to think the whole ocean is changing, and we're just now really noticing. And it's not just the water. There's news about a volcano going off under the ocean near Oregon. Do eruptions like that happen often?
Oh, that's the axial seamount. So it's about 300 miles off Oregon and close to 5,000 feet underwater. The team at the University of Washington and Axial Seamount Observatory keeps tabs on it. The seafloor's starting to bulge, which means magma's pooling up, and they're already seeing more tiny earthquakes, like up to 2,000 a day right before an eruption. The last big one was in 2015.
That's wild. So what happens when one of these erupts?
Sometimes they'll just send plumes of ash and strange minerals into the water, making it cloudy for miles. But every so often, an eruption is so powerful that it creates a brand new island. Some cultures believe these sudden appearances, or disappearances, were signs from the deep, or the work of ancient sea beings. And considering most of this is happening in darkness, miles below the surface, it's kind of like the ocean has its own secret world-building project going on. But for the most part, these eruptions stay hidden far beneath the waves. So unless you're close by, you might never even know they happened.
That sounds apocalyptic, but are people on land actually at risk, or is it just cool science?
No need to panic if you're on land. It's really far out and way down deep. But big underwater eruptions can stir up chemicals and particles, basically make the water even cloudier, so even less sunlight gets down to the deep.
So first the light changes, then the Earth itself is moving. And animals are part of this too. I saw that octopus riding a mako shark. That looked totally unreal. Was that for real?
It really happened. The University of Auckland's Marine Science Group filmed it in the Hauraki Gulf with drones and underwater cameras. A Maori octopus, so a big, smart octopus, was gripping onto the snout of a short-fin mako shark. Both those animals are common there, but no one's ever caught them teaming up, or whatever that was. This is the first time it's been filmed. Both animals looked pretty calm in the footage. Scientists aren't sure if it was the octopus trying to hunt, hiding, or just an opportunistic ride. No one knows for sure.
The ocean has a whole playlist of strange behavior right now. But it's not just animals you can see. Now there's new news about monk seals making calls no one's ever heard before, right?
Yeah, that's another big one. University of Hawaii and NOAA's monk seal research program planted underwater microphones all around the Hawaiian Islands. This got published in Royal Society Open Science. Over thousands of hours, they caught monk seals making new kinds of calls. Some are deep sounds that travel for miles, totally different from anything previously recorded. It just goes to show there's still an entire lost soundscape out there.
That's so much all at once. Oceans losing light, volcanoes waking up, octopuses catching rides, and seals singing new songs. It feels like the deep really is trying to say something.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we wanted Brother Gideon on tonight. Someone who spent years literally watching the boundary between land and the sea, paying attention to these kinds of signals.
Gideon, thank you so much for joining us tonight. With everything that's been happening in the oceans, I keep finding myself picturing you out there, watching from that lighthouse. Has it felt any different this week with the way things have been in the news?
Thanks, Skye and Reece. Out here, you settle into the rhythm. Wind coming off the water, the lamp sweeping over open sea, and an awful lot of quiet. Well, solitude, really. Still, when you're the one keeping watch on the edge of land, it doesn't always feel like it's just about ships and storms. Some days it feels like you're standing right at the boundary itself, keeping an old kind of vigil.
Right, that's exactly what I was thinking. Since you've spent years literally at that threshold, we were hoping you might have a different take. I mean, between the scientists reporting the oceans growing darker, these new monk seal calls out in Hawaii, and then the footage from New Zealand, a mako shark actually swimming with an octopus wrapped around its head. It's been a wild stretch of headlines. How do you process all that, hearing it from where you are?
You know, for me, and it's not just me really, it's the tradition I come from, science talks about the photic zone, the sunlit layer out in the sea, as if it's just a band where life thrives. But the old stories I've studied, they always saw that light as a bit more, a sort of barrier. Not a wall exactly, but something that holds the deep, chaotic stuff down below. And when word gets around that the sunlight isn't making it as far as it used to, well, to someone like me, that can sound like the barrier is starting to give.
Just so I'm totally clear, when you talk about that darkness pressing up, do you mean it literally? Or is it more like, I don't know, an old metaphor for tough times?
It's a fair question. But in those old stories, it's not just poetry or doom and gloom language. They say when the light gives way, what they'd call Typhonian chaos actually stirs. Something old and wild trying to move up. It's not just symbolic. They meant it as a real, pressing change.
That connection actually makes me want to circle back to the news, since these stories about animals and sounds are so striking. Do you think things like the octopus and the shark, or the new seal calls, would have been seen as early warnings or omens in those old traditions?
I'd say absolutely. If you look at stories and records, across time really, when the boundary is getting thin, nature puts up signs. New voices echoing from the deep, animals linking up in ways we haven't seen before, shorelines full of restless movement. It's the world's way of ringing a bell, if you're willing to pay attention.
You mentioned listening for those signals. Have you ever felt that yourself, right there at the lighthouse? Any experiences that made you think, okay, this feels like more than just the usual wildlife or weather?
Out here, there are nights when the fog settles in and the wildlife just seems restless. Birds might circle, and the calls from the shore don't sound quite the same. It's times like that when you really feel like the world is trying to send a message. It does make you think about the old tales.
That really does make you wonder. The way you describe those kinds of nights, when everything feels different, it sounds like those old stories were really tuned into something. When the ocean's light starts to dim, like we're seeing now, what did those legends say could actually happen?
When the light got thin, people believed it could let things from the deep rise up. Sudden storms, strange creatures, or other signs the balance was changing. That barrier was important in their minds, and when it weakened, it meant anything could come through.
When you say chaos, like what's below that barrier, are we just talking wild storms, or did people mean something deeper?
Oh, definitely deeper. Storms were part of it, sure, but in those old tales, chaos had actual faces, or at least names for the forces below. Typhon from Greek myth, Leviathan in the Bible, Tiamat in the old Babylonian stories. All these beings imagined as waiting under the sea, ready to rise up if the barrier failed.
Leviathan is such a wild name. Was that supposed to be like a giant sea serpent? Or am I just picturing something out of a monster movie?
That's actually pretty close. In old Hebrew stories, Leviathan was this massive sea dragon or serpent covered in scales like armor, with jaws big enough to swallow the light. Some legends say nothing could harm it, and just seeing it could scare even the bravest sailors. It was the shape chaos took in those tales.
Wow, just hearing about that gives me chills.
And the thing is, even now you'll find groups like the Typhonian Order still paying attention to that idea, believing these dark and light cycles aren't just stories, they're real. And each of those ancient beings meant something a little different depending on the culture. Some were monsters, some creators, some both.
Typhonian Order. That's such an intense name. Is that an actual group?
Yes, it is. The Typhonian Order started in England in the last century as a kind of offshoot from old occult societies. They're really interested in the idea that the chaos from those ancient myths isn't just a story, but something real you can connect with. Their name comes from Typhon, the huge monster from Greek myth. The order mixes old rituals with new ways of thinking about what could be hiding underneath the world we know. So when you hear about them, it's all about blurring the lines between myth and real life.
That just makes the ocean feel even wilder, honestly. It's incredible to think people still reach back to those ancient stories. And there are so many different beings at the center of them. So, Tiamat, was she a goddess or more like a sea monster? I always think of these ancient chaos beings as almost the original mothers of everything.
Tiamat is both, really. In the oldest Babylonian stories, she's the saltwater sea, a kind of primal ocean goddess who gave birth to the first gods. But when those younger gods started fighting, Tiamat changed. She became a dragon and gathered an army of monsters to try and bring back control. Then there's the famous battle. The god Marduk challenges Tiamat, and he defeats her by splitting her in two. With her body, he forms the sky and the earth. So in those stories, she's not just a threat to order, she actually becomes the raw material that makes up our world. A lot of old sea serpent legends, or tales of great floods, kind of echo back to Tiamat in some way.
A dragon leading monsters and making the world. It's really powerful.
Yeah, and for listeners Googling along, that's the Typhonian Order Gideon mentioned earlier. It's just striking how these really old stories still show up in what people talk about today, especially with news like we've been seeing.
Right, and the idea of people standing watch at those boundaries isn't just something out of myth, it's everywhere. Temples, places where fires are kept burning, and yeah, lighthouses too. There's a story I love about a lighthouse keeper ringing the bell during a solar eclipse, not because he thought it would drive the dark off, but more to let everyone know, land and sea both, that someone was still up there, keeping the light.
That gives me chills. It makes me wonder about all those old lighthouse towers with their odd carvings and hidden nooks. Do you ever think the people who built them believed they were holding back more than just storms and shipwrecks?
Definitely. Up here, there are old tales that say the lighthouses weren't just for navigation. They were part of a network of resonant markers along the coast, each one placed to anchor the boundaries between land, sea, and the unknown. The rituals, the bell ringing, even the ways the lamps were built, it was all about reinforcing that barrier, especially when the sky brought some rare darkness. Eclipses, for example. Those were the moments everyone felt the world's guard was thinnest. That's when the keepers would be extra vigilant, ringing the bell or tending the flame, making sure the light stayed burning as a kind of promise that the darkness wouldn't take hold. Even now, some say you can feel the old tension whenever the sun disappears, like the past pressing in for just a moment. And honestly, the way people still get anxious or superstitious during eclipses these days, it's just the old fears resurfacing in a modern way.
You know, it's funny. Whenever there's a big eclipse, everyone I know gets super intense about it. Suddenly my feed is full of warnings. Don't charge your crystals, or don't make any major decisions until it's over. But most people don't really know why eclipses got this reputation for being so heavy. Was it always a major omen thing, Gideon?
Oh yes, for a long time, eclipses have been seen as moments when the usual order falls apart. The sudden darkness in the middle of the day scared people, and it often meant something big was about to change. People would get anxious, sometimes even stop what they were doing, because they saw it as a sign the world was a little less safe in those moments.
Yeah, and in a lot of cultures, there were these big stories about what was happening up in the sky. In ancient China, people thought a giant dragon was swallowing the sun, so they'd bang drums to scare it off. Vikings imagined wolves chasing the sun and moon, and in India, the demon Rahu was supposed to be stealing the sun for just a moment before it slipped away again. Eclipses were seen as moments when the usual order frayed. Kings got scared, armies might retreat, and sometimes whole empires took it as a sign that everything had to change.
That makes the bell ringing feel almost sacred, like keeping the light going was a way to promise the sun would come back.
Exactly. It's a ritual that says someone's still paying attention, even when the world goes dark in the middle of the day. And it's not just eclipses. Just about every culture found some way to keep a light burning, a fire tended, as a kind of promise that order can hold through any darkness. Those old stories, they all echo the sense that someone, somewhere, should stand watch as the boundaries blur and the night presses in. Yeah, it's ancient. The idea of keeping a lamp burning at the world's edge pops up everywhere. In ancient Greece, they had the eternal flame of Hestia in every city, a fire that was never supposed to go out, watched by priestesses. The Romans did the same with the Vestal Virgins, keeping the city's sacred fire going as a sign the gods were watching over them.
Kind of like spiritual lighthouse keepers.
Exactly. And you see it in old Celtic and Norse traditions too. Beacons were lit on headlands and hills to warn, or just to say, "We're still here," when the night felt longest. Even temples in India and Japan have keepers who tend the fire or the lantern. Because at some deep level, people have always wanted someone keeping watch at the boundary, holding back the darkness, just in case something old tries to slip through.
There's just something comforting about knowing somebody's up late, tending the light for everyone else. It makes me wonder if people working in those lighthouses today ever feel that same connection, or if anyone thinks about those old rituals anymore. That makes me wonder, do any lighthouse keepers today actually know any of this old backstory? Or is it mostly just routines now and no one really thinks about where it came from?
Honestly, most of us are just following tradition. You light the lamps when the sun goes down, you keep an eye out, you fill in the logbooks, mostly because, well, that's what keeps everyone safe. But now and then, you stumble on an old saying carved into the wall, or an odd line in a logbook, and you realize these routines started with something much older and deeper behind them.
And it isn't just what we see, right? The recent monk seal recordings, those new weird calls the scientists found, does that fit into those old ideas too? Stories about animal voices as a warning or a message?
Definitely. Think about the Sirens in Greek myth. Their calls were supposed to carry messages from the deep.
I always picture like mermaids on rocks when I hear about sirens. That's not right though, is it? I think I've got my myths crossed.
You're actually in good company, Skye. Most people today see sirens and mermaids as kind of the same thing. Thanks, Disney. But in the oldest Greek stories, sirens were nothing like mermaids. They had the bodies of birds and the faces of women, and more wings than fins. You'd find them perched on jagged rocks, singing with these wild, prophetic voices that promised hidden secrets or doom to sailors passing by.
Okay, that's way more unsettling than a mermaid with a seashell bra.
Right? The idea shifted over the centuries, drifting from bird women calling across the waves to the more fish-tailed mermaid image we know now. But that old version, half woman, half bird, fits the whole theme of boundaries getting blurred, land and air, known and unknown. And there's still something thrilling about the thought that their songs could reveal things no mortal was meant to know.
And I can tell you, there are plenty of stories from around here about people hearing strange animal calls before big storms. It's not unusual for lighthouse keepers to get a feeling that something is shifting when strange sounds echo off the rocks. Moments like that remind you why old tales paid so much attention to these warnings. They leave you wondering whether they mean trouble is coming, or if you'll only know what they meant after it's too late.
So that makes me wonder, when signs like that showed up in the old stories, was it always a disaster coming, or was it sometimes left a mystery?
In a lot of the old legends, whether it's floods, lost lands like Atlantis, or great migrations, big changes would usually follow after some boundary broke down. Sometimes the stories ended with disaster, and sometimes with something new beginning. But most of the time, the stories don't say for sure if people could ever tell what the warning signs really meant until it was already happening.
So what would it look like now, if that barrier of sunlight you talked about, what some stories call a skin of light, really did hold? Or if the abyss managed to break through? Are we getting close to something like that?
If the barrier holds, the sea stays bright, you get life carrying on. Safe, familiar. But if it fails, then yeah, darkness spreads, the old boundaries vanish, and what used to feel safe just, well, doesn't anymore. And you know, Skye, I think we're closer to a turning point than we realize most of the time. What happens next? I figure it depends on whether we're ready to see what's really happening out there, and if we do something about it.
That really makes me think, Gideon. The way you talk about these boundaries holding or failing, it kind of changes how I picture big disasters from the past. Like, I wonder if things like mass extinctions or ships that vanished at sea, maybe they look random on the surface, but underneath, maybe they're what happens when that line between the sunlit world and the deep darkness actually slips.
So when you say that, do you mean stuff like the dinosaurs going extinct? That sort of massive event?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when we're taught about that in science class, it's all about asteroids or massive volcanoes, right? But in the stories Gideon's talking about, it's almost like there's this fragile, almost invisible layer, some kind of skin of light that keeps chaos held down in the deep, and if that fails, then everything familiar gets swept away. What's wild is that you see this idea everywhere, old myths from all over the world. There's usually a flood or darkness that falls after people ignore a really specific warning.
That's something you hear a lot up here actually. Around Shetland, or really any place with a rough coastline, you get all these old tales about ships vanishing at sea, or even stories about the Bermuda Triangle. They're all told as times when the usual line between worlds felt especially thin.
Gideon, you just mentioned the Bermuda Triangle. Why do you think it's gotten such a mysterious reputation in these old stories?
Well, the Triangle is one of those places that always seems a little out of step with the ordinary world. The stories people tell, whether they're sailors or just folks living near the water, usually have to do with boundaries getting weak, ships and planes disappearing without a trace, as if they slipped through a crack. It fits right in with all those old legends about places where the line between worlds goes thin, and you never know what might come through.
And just so everyone knows the basics, the Bermuda Triangle is a stretch of sea forming a rough triangle, Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico as the points. Over the years, stories started piling up. Ships and planes setting out in clear weather, then disappearing completely. Sometimes whole crews gone, no wreckage, no distress calls. The most famous is Flight 19, a squadron of Navy planes in 1945 that flew into the triangle and just vanished. The rescue plane that went to look for them disappeared too. Or there's the USS Cyclops, a massive Navy cargo ship lost in 1918. Over 300 men, never seen or heard from again.
That's so wild. I always assumed it was just media hype, but it really is a stretch of ocean with a reputation.
Absolutely. The legend got bigger in the 60s and 70s, especially after a book came out, stringing these mysteries together, all with that vanished into thin air vibe. People started saying compasses spun, time got strange, whole vessels slipped between worlds. Even scientists admit it's a tricky bit of ocean, with sudden storms and tricky currents. But the stories? They stick, because there's something about the sea that just begs you to believe it's hiding doorways the rest of us can't quite see.
And those tales, whether they're warnings or invitations, have a way of echoing through every coastline community, stirring up old memories whenever a disappearance is mentioned. It's why stories like the Bermuda Triangle or the Erebus linger on, remind us that the sea still holds its secrets and that sometimes it doesn't give them back.
That's so interesting. The Erebus. I think I've heard the name, but what actually happened to that ship?
It was a British exploration ship that disappeared in the Arctic along with its crew and wasn't found for over a century.
It's such a haunting name for a ship. Erebus always reminds me of those shadow work, things my yoga friends are into, like facing down your own night side. But Gideon, in Greek stories, wasn't Erebus actually a god or something?
Yes, that's right. In the oldest Greek legends, Erebus wasn't just darkness, it was the first deep darkness, like the shadow between the living world and whatever comes after. They saw it as a place every soul passed through once they left this world. So when a ship named Erebus vanishes at sea, it feels like more than just bad luck. It's almost like crossing over into something unknown.
Okay, that's way more epic than just bad luck at sea. No wonder the story still sends chills down people's spines.
The whole expedition vanished without a trace. They just disappeared into the ice, nobody really knowing what happened. That mystery and the darkness in the name kept the story alive for generations. And honestly, you find echoes of stories like that on every coastline. The sense that the sea is always hiding something just out of reach.
Right, and there's almost always some kind of sign beforehand. A flock of seabirds suddenly leaving, or seals making unusual calls just before a big storm. It's nature's way of sending a heads up, if you're paying attention.
Yeah, that kind of warning pops up in some of the most famous myths too. Take Atlantis, or even Noah's Ark. Those stories almost always begin with a sign people miss or refuse to believe. And then, not long after, disaster hits.
Atlantis is one of those places I've always wondered if it was ever real, or if someone just dreamed it up for a story. Do we actually know where the legend comes from?
That one goes all the way back to Plato, about 2,400 years ago. He described Atlantis as this great island with people who were masters of arts and science, living in almost unbelievable wealth and power. But in his story, the Atlanteans grew too proud, started making enemies, even tried to take over the wider world. So the gods, according to Plato, punished them. Earthquakes and floods swallowed the whole island in a single night.
So it's really more than just a story about a lost city. When people find those ruins or oddly shaped stones out there, do you think they might have been more than just buildings? Almost like parts of a system?
People really haven't stopped looking for Atlantis. Every time someone finds something unusual on the sea floor or on an old map, the idea comes up again. Like we're still searching for some hidden message from the past.
That's a great question, Skye. Around here, there are plenty of old stories about fishermen discovering odd things tangled in their nets. Smooth metal discs covered in markings no one can quite decipher, or pieces of crystal set into strange frames, almost like they were meant to focus light or sound. Some lighthouse logs even mention stones along the shore that hum or vibrate when the weather turns. The old-timers would say these weren't just curiosities, they were fragments of something larger, built with intention. There's a thread you hear in old lighthouse lore and fishermen's tales that those underwater ruins might not have been regular homes or temples. Some say they were pieces of a kind of vast defense, think of a shield or even a network, scattered across the sea to keep what's below in check. And here's the part most people miss. Legend has it, some of these places weren't just meant for holding back the darkness, but for sending out warnings whenever the boundaries started to break. Like ancient beacons or alarm bells, their whole purpose was to give some kind of message from the deep, if only anyone up above was listening. And in some traditions, those warnings weren't just signals. They might come as strange voices or omens if you knew how to pay attention.
That idea of ruins as warning systems makes me think about the kind of messengers in those old stories, like sirens or oracles. Did people actually believe those were real voices from the sea or the earth? I mean, not just symbolic, but actual warnings?
Absolutely, Skye. There are old tales, some say even fragments of real history, about an order of listeners, sometimes called the Sirenic Order. These weren't just lone oracles on windswept cliffs, but generations who trained themselves to hear and interpret the ocean's messages, its songs, animal calls, shifts in currents. For those who believed, these voices were very real, not just symbols. When the sea spoke, the Sirenic interpreters listened and shared their warnings. And you see echoes of that all over, the famous oracles of Greece, the legendary Sirens, people everywhere listening for signs from the deep world beneath.
Right. And the tradition of listening for those messages was everywhere, not just legend. Like for the oracle at Delphi, the temple was built right over a fissure in the ground. People believed the priestess could actually hear messages coming up from the earth, or maybe even from somewhere deeper. And with sirens too, it wasn't just a story for sailors. Their calls could be warnings or temptations. But either way, people genuinely listened.
And honestly, that's not as ancient as it sounds. Even today, you get lighthouse keepers who pay attention to unusual animal calls, especially from seals, when the weather's about to turn. If a few of them start making the same new, strange sounds, a lot of folks will actually make a note in the log. It's tradition, and sometimes it just feels right to mark it down.
And it keeps happening. Look at some of the things we call mysteries now. If there's a mass whale stranding, or the sea lights up with those glowing waves, science investigates. But the old traditions, they'd take events like that as nature sounding some kind of alarm, saying that the old boundaries are shifting.
You know, those bioluminescent waves are unreal. You see them along the California coast sometimes. People say the water and sand can glow blue with every step. I always wondered, Reece, what even causes that?
Most of the time, it's these tiny plankton in the water, dinoflagellates. When the water's disturbed, like by waves or footprints, they flash this neon blue light. It's a kind of chemical reaction they use to either scare off predators or attract attention. People used to call it sea fire or milky seas, thinking it had to be magic, but it's just billions of little living lights turning the waves into something out of a dream.
So every glowing wave is like a whole hidden galaxy, right under the surface.
Exactly. You see it in glowing waves, in strange animal calls, these moments when science and old stories overlap. It's just one more way the ocean reminds us that the world is always sending signs, if we care to notice.
Honestly, before tonight, I never would have thought twice about a news story on seals or ocean animals. But after hearing how all these signs and old warnings tie together, I think I'll be looking at those stories totally differently. Thanks, both of you.
Yeah, I think after everything tonight, hearing all these stories and signs, it really makes me pay more attention to what's changing around us.
That means a lot, Reece. And Gideon, thank you so much for spending this evening with us and sharing your stories. There's just something different about hearing it from someone who's really out there on the edge.